If you're trying to make any kind of meaningful, effective change in your life, you've come to the right place. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of We're Talking Shift. My special guest today is Mr. Alec Zeck, and I'm really looking forward to talking with him about something that is happening a lot. It's been happening probably since the beginning of humanity, but it seems like it just gets worse, and that is generational family trauma. So we're going to talk a little bit about his experience with that and how he broke the cycle of it. And then I want to segue into a lot of the similarities that we're seeing playing out on a larger scale regarding some of the stuff going on in our world right now. So before we dive in, let me tell you just a little bit about Alec. Alec Zeck is a speaker, a writer. He's a holistic health advocate and a mind-body-spirit coach, kind of like me in that way. And he's a former Army captain. He is also the executive director and founder of Health Freedom for Humanity, which is a nonprofit whose mission is to unite people from all walks of life under one common purpose, which is the reclamation and defense of health freedom. Y'all know how I feel about that. We've talked about that before with Tommy John on this podcast. Alec is also the co-founder of the Way Forward podcast, which features conversations, interviews, panel discussions, and presentations with some of the most prominent leaders in the mind, body, spirit, wellness, oneness, free thinking, individual sovereignty, and living in service to others category. That was a mouthful. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that mouthful.
Whew. Well, and I'm a little dehydrated because I've been drinking coffee all morning. So
all good. I understand.
Trying to get it out. So anyway, thank you for spending some time with us today, because I know that you are highly sought after these days with all the things that you've got going on. So I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, I really want to kind of tackle two main subjects today. And before I do that, I'm just going to say, for listeners, if you're watching or listening, there's no rating on this, so you can be certain that there's probably going to be some F-bombs dropped here or there. So if you have kids around, I'm just giving you fair warning right now. We do not edit our language on this podcast. So there we go.
That's good for me to know as well, because I always want to say something, then I almost go, wait, can I cut on here? And then
can I say that? Yes, you can. I'm a fan of it, so it's all good. Don't worry about it. We're just going to be real, right?
Good.
Sometimes I think it just helps to really drive home a point.
Yep.
So I'm not worried about that. Okay. So, all right. Now I've named my disclaimer. Okay, so these two main subjects that I want to focus on today, I think at first they may seem a little bit unrelated for those of you listening, but I think by the time we get to the end of this conversation, you're going to see the many similarities. They'll become more apparent as we go. So I think that the form of the similarities is going to be different, but the content is essentially the same. And I feel like everything that happens is kind of like a microcosm of a much bigger macrocosmic, action. And I don't know about you, Alec, but I'm one of those people that when I'm outside walking around and I look down and I see a huge an ant hill, I look at that and go, that's what we like from way up there. We look like just this little tiny, crazy mound of activity that seemingly makes no sense, but we are busy as hell on our anthill, right? And so, but I look at that and I think, okay, that's just so micro, but that's how we are too. And so I was listening to you on somebody else's podcast recently, and you said something very similar, which is why that stuck so much with me, because it's so in alignment with the way I think. And it was in regards to what you and your family kind of went through and evolved out of, and then talking about what's going on now. So I think a great place to start would be having you kind of give people that maybe aren't really familiar with this a definition of generational trauma. Who is, what is it? Who is vulnerable to it? How is that different than, like personal abuse between two people?
Mm.
How does it present itself? And then we'll talk about, your experience and probably your mom's too, because they're pretty entangled.
Yeah, I guess the best way I could define generational trauma is like when people in a family lineage continue to take what was done to them, and because they don't feel well within themselves and they haven't done the work to heal it, they then project that onto the next child, one of their children, and then that child does it to their children, and so on. That's what I would call generational trauma. I think it's compounding, right? I think it sort of accumulates, if you will, for, like, I look at it as me as someone who has broken that pattern of generational trauma, um, having to heal not only my own trauma that was inflicted upon me, but also the traumas of those above me, my dad, my grandpa, my great grandpa, my great great grandpa, because they hadn't actually done the work to heal it and they just projected it onto the next child.
Mm,
So it's the person who stops it, not to toot my own horn here, but takes on a lot of guilt and shame from other people and also from their own actions they may have committed prior to healing their own trauma, and
right.
has to really alchemize and do a lot of individual healing work, to get to the bottom of who and what we are individually, right?
Hmm.
And to understand that those things that were done to you were not a reflection of you at all, but they're also done for your betterment if you make it that way. I look at all of the things that happen to us in this life as catalysts for change, and that could be something that catalyzes you to be go down a darker path if you continue to perpetuate that, or it could be something that if you heal it properly you can reflect back to it and say, wow, that taught me how not to be. That taught me exactly, like, I look at my dad as the best possible teacher for me because I know exactly how not to be towards my son and my daughter and my wife.
Right. Yeah, and that's so key what you said, because and you can really take that concept and apply it not only to your own personal or interpersonal relationships, but anybody out there that you see that is behaving badly, shall we say, to one degree or another,
Mhm.
rather than rather than being really judgmental, negatively judging them, because everybody's got their reasons for the way they behave.
Mhm.
You can use that to go, you know what? That's a great demonstration and reminder to me of a way that I don't want to show up in the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, even to a certain degree, like these nefarious actors like Bill Gates, Dr.
Hmm.
Fauci, Klaus Schwab,
Hmm.
yeah, the things that they are doing are extremely harmful to humanity without a doubt.
Yeah.
But it's like we can look at them and say, wow, this gives me the depth of the darkness so that I can make an actual conscious decision for myself. Like, okay, do I want to go down this path? Because I see the depth of that, but I also see the depth of light over here. And
Right.
then within my own, things that have been impressed upon me, even prior to this lifetime, like what we are, our soul impresses us into this body, right? How we actually function and the quirks that we have, our personality, we make a conscious decision to choose one or the other or the spectrum in between. We have to have both so that we can make an authentic choice.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that but there's so many people that aren't conscious. So,
Yeah.
so that's the thing. We do need to make the conscious decision, the conscious choice. But I'm hoping that the extreme actions that are going on right now are going to have the effect of waking up a lot more people that are sort of asleep at the wheel. Because it's hard to make a new choice if you don't understand that you've been subconsciously making your choices all along. A lot of
Yeah.
people, I mean, it's hard for people to well, I mean, let's just call it like it is. People don't like to take responsibility for their station in life and where they're at. There's
Yeah.
there's a there's literally a pandemic of victimhood going on right now. I would say.
That for sure. And I think
Uh,
it's also sorry to interrupt you. I think it's
yeah, go
that,
ahead.
but it's also self-identifying with all of these labels and titles, these groups, us versus them.
Hmm.
And when you attach yourself to those titles and labels, you cover up what you are fundamentally, right? And when you cover up and you add and you become these things. I am a Chief sports fan. I am a army captain. I am this. I'm a Republican. I'm a Democrat. Like all those labels that you add on top of each other, you begin self-identifying with
Hmm.
those labels instead of I
Hmm.
am a man or I am a woman and I have a soul that was created by God that has been impressed into this body and I am representing a man or a woman in this lifetime. And you approach it from that position, you have an understanding of who and what you are fundamentally, then you're more
Hmm.
easily able to navigate this. And then you're conscious of your position and your relation to other people, to the earth, to nature, to animals, to plants, to whatever else. You have an understanding
Hmm.
of how you are supposed to uh, live in harmony in an interdependent fashion with your environment.
Hmm. Yeah. No, I'm really glad you said that because you're right. I'm a firm believer. I mean, everything that I think and do and put forth always really comes from a very spiritual basis. If you don't have that spiritual basis, then you're kind of at the mercy of whatever is going to take hold of you at the time and pull you in a certain direction. And so, on that note, I think I'm a firm believer that whatever you follow up with the words "I am," that is what you're going to create experiences based on that. And I think you're right. There's a lot of confusion or just lack of thought put into I am one of those many things that you mentioned, which really is, you will become that then, but it's so limiting because it's really not what you are, it's what you do, it's what you think, it's what you believe. It's nothing to do with what you actually are. It's not the truth of your being. It's
Exactly.
just your conditioning and what you've decided to do and think and believe in the world. Yeah,
Exactly. And
interesting.
for me, that's what, before I had done any trauma healing,
Mhm.
that's what got me through. I was always looking for the thing to sort of prop up because I didn't know who I was fundamentally. So
Right.
I am a West Point cadet. I am an army officer. I am, a professional athlete at one point in time. Like these
Yeah,
labels that I was self-identifying with, to a certain degree, for a little bit, they carried me through because
sure.
as I was identifying as I am a West Point cadet, what is a West Point cadet like? Okay, a West Point cadet, it follows the cadet honor code, is a very honorable person, is a great leader. And those things helped
Mhm.
carry me through. But I was still
Mhm.
self identifying with something else. And I was still externalizing my self worth with that identity, not having
Right.
an actual self worth internally. Right. And
Right.
it wasn't
Yeah.
until I healed my trauma that I had this sort of freak out moment one day, actually, sitting in like in this room down the hallway. Actually, we were here 2.5, 3 years ago, and I had this moment of like I was doing a lot of childhood trauma healing. And I had a freak out moment like, oh my God, I don't know who I am. Like I was bawling my eyes out, like I have no clue who I am, no idea. And it was
Mhm.
a very much like a dark night of the soul,
Mhm.
2, 3, 4 months. And
Mhm.
within that same experience, I kind of like came to after I cried for a while. There's multiple days of crying, but after I cried, I realized like, wow, I am who I make myself. Like I get to now decide who I am, like what I am. Like fundamentally, I get to find out who I am and
Yeah.
start living and representing that authentically.
Yeah. And it's so important. I mean, that those 3 or 4 months of your dark night of the soul experience was obviously what you needed to, sort of undo everything
Mm,
that you thought you were
yeah.
so that you could be open to finding the truth of who you are and
Mm,
what you are.
yeah.
And it's so important too because that's such a common thing for so many people to place their value, their self-worth, and basically who they are, define themselves by things that they do, by their role or their, career, their job, by something that they do. Um, and then when they lose that, they're lost. They don't know then what their value is, because it's all been placed on something external. It's all been based on something, that really isn't anything to do with the truth of who they are. And that's where a lot of people run into that. That's where a lot of people that retire, that have been, doing the same thing for decades and decades, and then all of a sudden they don't have that position anymore, and you have a lot of midlife crises happening, and a lot of lost souls going, now what? Who am I? Why am I here? What's my value?
I noticed
But
that quite a bit when I was still in the army at the very beginning of COVID, when we had to go into lockdown for 3 or 4 weeks. We didn't have to like show up to work. We were doing everything from home. We were basically shut down. And we had like a group chat between me and the classmates that I had. I was at a class for the army at the time, like a 6-month course. And all my classmates were like, oh my God, I'm getting so bored. I don't know what to do with myself. This is horrible, blah, 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 blah. And for me, although I hate lockdown and the purpose and intent behind it, lockdown was fine for me
right.
because I'm not, I self-identify with work. I'm able to do other things because I am fundamentally not my job, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's been it's been a whole interesting process, this whole what's going on, everything that's tied in with lockdowns, and we're gonna come back around to that. I'm gonna put a pin in it for a minute. I wanna ask, so back to the generational trauma before we move on, just, a little bit about, so that we can kind of connect the dots, like a little bit about your experience, your mom's, how the medical systems made things worse. And then basically, maybe some of those first steps to how did you recognize things and start turning things around, so that we can help listeners that may be in that same space.
Absolutely. So I've gotten pretty good at distilling this because
Yeah.
it was so chaotic and so like there's so many jumbled up pieces, but
Mm-hmm.
I've gotten pretty good at this because I've been asked to share it so many times. So
Sure.
I grew up uh, in a very, very chaotic household as a child. Very chaotic, very abusive, very tense all the time. Like, when's the next shoe going to drop? When's the next fight going to be? My
Mm.
dad was repeating patterns of generational trauma and abuse, and my mom was very codependent. So she was more focused on fixing my dad and focused on like finding her self-worth in him, and the love that she did or did not receive from him, than she was on parenting us, because myself and my siblings were harmed by the relationship as well. My dad was very physically abusive, emotionally abusive, verbally abusive, spiritually abusive, every form of abuse. um, and again, he was just repeating patterns, right?
Mhm.
His dad was the same way, his dad's dad was the same way. There's a lot of extramarital affairs in my parents' relationship. Sorry, you probably hear my son screaming in the
It's all
background right
good. It's real
now.
life.
But yeah, it's real life. I am a dad, so I apologize if you hear my kids. So anyway, that experience for me was, like I said, just very, very chaotic. And I was made to feel like I was a piece of shit because my dad was sort of taking his internal, he didn't feel good about himself and projecting that onto me. And it was, now in hindsight, in a roundabout way, because he did love me and he wanted me to succeed so much and be better than he was, that he was so fucking hard on me. And when
Mhm.
I say hard on me, I mean, he was my basketball coach for my, club, like summer basketball team that I played for from 6th grade all the way to 10th or 11th grade. And in 6th grade, I played bad in the game, and he would grab me by my shirt and like headbutt me a little bit and say, "Get your fucking head in the game, you fucking pussy," like that
Oh,
constantly. Um,
that's
and
rough.
and yeah, and then if I played bad, and there's one time I played bad and I was 12 years old, and he said that I wasn't worthy to be a Zeck, and I wasn't worthy to have that last name, and he didn't speak to me the rest of the night. In 8th grade, I played horribly in a game, and he got in my face in front of my teammates back at the hotel room. And I was always scared to mess up. And I was always like, okay, I am a basketball player. That's what I have to be. And if I don't do well at that, then I'm nothing. And there was so much pressure to be that I always fucked up. I was always like, I was good when I was good. I was good. It was all predicated on whether like I hit my first shot in the game. If I hit my first shot, I was going to score 40 points. If I missed my first shot, I would look over at the bench, my dad, and he'd be like, get your fucking head in the game. And then I was just like tense, like scared to mess up. And anyway, and this is the worst example, but in eighth grade, I was 14 and my dad, I played really bad in a game against this team from Florida and got back to the hotel room, and my dad, got in my face, basically calling me all those names that I'd already said. Don't want to have to repeat that too much. But I kind of like stood back up to him and said, like, I'm not that. And then he proceeded to beat the shit out of me in front of my teammates. So it was very, very, very traumatic. And it wasn't just like physical, it was verbal, emotional. It was all of it. Right. And sort of the physical stuff started to stop, or began to stop once I got old enough and I could fight back a little bit. But then I also carried this rage inside of me that like the entirety of the time that I was in college, if I would go out with my friends and one dude would just like look at my friend the wrong way, that was my way of, I would use that moment to fight someone then and take out my anger. And it was under the guise of, oh, I'm standing up for my friends. And it's like, dude, all he did was push me. You don't need to headbutt him. Like, it's like, yeah. And so I had a lot of
overreacting.
And that was the excuse, right? Like I would let things boil up inside of me because I didn't know how to deal with my own emotions, because I was always taught to stuff them down and just stop being a quote fucking pussy the whole time, and I always just stuffed it down, and it would get to a boiling point where if something would happen, I would get in a fist fight. And that's how I handled my emotions. I was very emotionally chaotic myself. And luckily I went to West Point, and that was like a blessing in disguise, that my dad was so abusive and so tough on me, is that I was smart because I was forced to get good grades. So I got good enough grades to go to West Point. But when my dad went to rehab around when I was 14, my mom, because of the trauma that she had experienced, went to go see a psychiatrist. And again, like growing up in that household, you can imagine like some of those same things, the emotional, the manipulation happening to my mom, had so much trauma, and went to go see a psychiatrist. And we believe these psychiatrists were the experts that were practicing evidence-based medicine and that they knew best. And all the psychiatrist did was prescribe her multiple benzodiazepines and SSRIs, label her as bipolar and depressed, right? And over the course of basically, for me, from age 14 through age 23-ish, my mom, her health continued to spiral and get worse and worse and worse. And it was so bad because we thought in the up moments that the drugs were working. We're like, oh my God, the drugs are working. And then the down moments. And when I say down moments for her, like not only do I have that experience with my dad, right? My mom, who's somewhat been neglectful, and she would acknowledge that throughout my adolescence, because she was more focused on fixing my dad. And then because of these psych drugs, now she's like not mentally present at all, because in her down moments, and there were a lot of them for like weeks on end, she would be hallucinating, not leaving her room. And when I say hallucinating, thinking that I was her dad and I'd be holding her and that she was her 13-year-old self again. In and out of mental hospitals, multiple suicide attempts. It was very dark. It was extremely dark. And I almost left West Point when I was a junior, because it was awful. It was awful. And I thank God I didn't know. But in 2016, right when I was graduating from West Point, my mom found Dr. Kelly Brogan by chance, because she was going to see a therapist at the time. And Kelly's book, A Mind of Your Own, had just released a month prior to. And this therapist approached my mom in one of her moments that she was mentally present, was like, hey, I highly recommend going to check this lady out. I think she could really help you. And then so my mom booked an appointment with Dr. Kelly Brogan. And when she approached us with that, at this time, my sister, my brother, and I, and my dad were already discussing long-term care facilities for my mom. We were like, okay, we gotta find a place to put her up, like institutionalize her, or we're gonna lose her to suicide. My siblings and I were already having conversations like, we cannot get too close to her. We're not gonna get the old mom back, because we had already gone through the ringer of, oh my God, her up moments, she's back again. A month later, darkness again. And just like that, up and down, up and down, up and down all the time, right? And it was a really big reflection of my childhood, because like there was already so much tension, and like you didn't know when my dad was going to come home pissed off or not. You never knew.
Yeah.
So,
and she was probably what, in her 40s maybe
yeah,
at the
so my
time?
mom's 50 now, so she was like 45,
Yeah.
45.
So I mean, that's really young to be thinking about putting somebody in an
Yeah,
institution. That's
yeah,
sad.
it was really sad. And then by chance again, found Dr. Kelly Brogan, because that therapist had recommended to go see her. And my mom went to go see Kelly. And remember, Kelly is supposedly a quote pseudoscientific quack that
Oh
spreads
yeah.
misinformation,
Uh-huh.
practices an extreme holistic health approach. And
Like that's a
Kelly,
bad thing.
I know, it's just so twisted. And Kelly, she told my mom, "You're not depressed. You're not bipolar. These drugs are making your symptoms worse. You have trauma that you haven't healed or dealt with, that is stored in your body, that is stored in your psyche. You need to look at food in a completely different way. Look at it as a form of medicine in and of itself." Start doing coffee enemas, which was very shocking to me, and I'm a huge fan.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
but yeah, it was in becoming more mindful and
Yeah.
your approach that way. And so in a matter of 4 to 6 months, my mom began healing healing and reversing all of her symptoms. And we were seeing a side of her we hadn't seen in years, right? And a lot of that trauma began to resurface, because there's a lot of trauma healing involved. So that, like, there's more to the story that I don't necessarily need to get into, but my dad went into another cycle of shame, and he also had started making a lot more money at the time that my mom starts healing this trauma. So they're no longer together. Some events have happened, and some more things. He started repeating a little bit more patterns, and I just understand that it's because he never healed any of his trauma, right? Like I fully get that, despite the things that he's done. And I love my dad. He's the only dad that I'll have, and he's been the greatest teacher for me of how not to be, right? But anyway, when my mom began healing, tons of cognitive dissonance for me, because I'm like, how did these doctors that she was with for years not know anything? They're supposed to be the experts. Like, what? Like, how is this one who's supposed to be crazy and pseudoscientific that's being featured on Joe Rogan, that everyone is in the comments is calling her a nut? Like, I'm like, this doesn't make sense. And my wife, who I'd just gotten married to at the time, 9 years prior, was diagnosed with lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. And after we saw my mom completely reverse her symptoms and heal, we were like, let's try the same with you. And she was on multiple immunosuppressive drugs. Rheumatologist told her that she was going to just have to live this way for the rest of her life. She's probably going to have a shorter lifespan. She was going to be bedridden later on in her life. She was going to be chronically inflamed forever. These drugs could help the symptoms, but those also created more symptoms of other things, which led to being on psych drugs, just the never-ending spiral. And we tried the same approach given to us by this quote pseudoscientific quack, and my wife reversed all of her symptoms in 4 to 6 months and was off all of her medication for her autoimmune conditions. And we went to go see a rheumatologist, and I think the most shocking thing was that he was not like curious. He was not like inquisitive at all. He wasn't like, please tell me more. She was just like, yeah, I've sort of cleaned up the way that I eat and become more mindful and started healing some of my trauma. And I don't feel like I need these drugs anymore. And she had blood levels to reflect that, right? Like her inflammation levels and her inflammation levels in her blood reflected that. And this rheumatologist was just kind of like, oh, okay. Like, didn't really care. It was just,
Is that mind-boggling? Like,
yeah, it was
how?
very, very, very mind-boggling. And it was just like so much shock to me, seeing these two people that I love so much completely reverse their symptoms and like the presentation of illness, one via the mental side, one via the physical side, and like all of them are intertwined. But the point is, it was so shocking, because I've always been taught that doctors know best. I mean, I grew up taking Z-Paks for zithromycin for strep throat, and like constantly using antibiotics, and like I didn't really give a shit about nutrition. I thought like I remember my strength and conditioning coach for my basketball team growing up was like, yeah, just go get a big pizza after we lift because
Yeah,
that's good to
carb
get those
load.
carbs. Yeah. I'm
Right.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and,
The
and luckily
backwards thinking.
I was young, so I had good detox pathways and whatnot. But then I had this new approach to health, and like I didn't view myself as unhealthy. I was 23 years old, and I was like, okay, like I feel fine, but like because my wife is eating this way, my mom's eating this way, and I see them starting to do these things, I'm gonna start trying them too. And I didn't realize how sick I was, despite
Yeah.
the like physical, like I look like a really athletic dude. And once I started eating healthy and really reapproaching, or I guess readjusting how I approach my health,
Mm-hmm.
it's when I would eat one of those things, I would like be like, oh my God, like I used to feel like this all the time. This is nuts to me. So the trauma healing for me though didn't really start until late 2017, early 2018. I had just gotten into this program in the Army called the U.S. Army World Class Athlete Program, where if you're on a U.S. national team for an Olympic sport, you get to do that full time in the Army. And so I had the opportunity to do that. And remember, I was like, I am the West Point graduate.
Mm-hmm.
I am the Army lieutenant. I am now a professional athlete while serving in the Army, like the coolest thing ever. And those are cool things, but that's who I was. And that's what always propped me up. I was always finding ways to prop myself up because I didn't know who I was.
Mm-hmm.
Starting this path with the nutrition side of things for sure, and then started researching obsessively on the pharmaceutical industry and what have you. Started looking into some of the more metaphysical, spiritual aspects of health at the time, but had not done any trauma healing yet. When I went to Germany and I was by myself playing professional handball, and I was like the only American on the team, everyone else was German, I felt very alone and isolated. And I was back in a situation again because my dad had started doing some things again, and it started bringing up some of that trauma that I had just stuffed down from when I was younger, like almost identically. And then I was playing on a team where I was probably the worst player on the team. So I was already scared to mess up because everyone else that was on the professional team that I was on had been playing since they were little kids, and I had only been playing the sport for 6 years at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of those traumas were resurfacing again. It was like a direct reflection of when I was younger playing in an AU basketball team, scared to mess up, like the same chaotic environment happening back home, like literally the exact same thing again. And I was forced, like I had no other choice because I just had time on my hands. I could either like find an addiction and repeat really harmful patterns, or turn inward. And I think it was what pulled me through was seeing how my dad was and seeing how miserable he was, but also the fact that I was an honorable West Point cadet. I was these things, and I was like, I can't do those bad things and harm myself more. I'm like forced to look inward, right?
Yeah.
And that was a lot of EFT, like tapping, like
Mm-hmm.
meridian tapping, a lot of journaling, a lot of reparenting myself by like getting into a deep meditative state and going back to that little boy that I needed to, like in parenting the way that I needed to be parented at that time. Like going
Mm-hmm.
back to those events, even some of the ones I described, and being the person that I needed at that time to tell me that like, hey, you are not a piece of shit. You are not a pussy. You are not
Mm-hmm.
fucking like unworthy. You are inherently worthy. You are perfect. I love you. And like it was
Yeah. So
very, yeah,
you reframed it all.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So when you reframe it, I do a lot of that too with a lot of my clients. When you reframe something and you're
Mm.
able to apply a new meaning to it,
Yeah.
then you generate different thoughts about it, which means you generate different emotions.
When these traumas started resurfacing, because my dad again was acting very similarly to how he did when I was younger, and I'd sort of just stuffed those under the rug, never talk about them, and like I'd always had this like awkwardness between my dad because we just stuffed those down and pretended that they didn't happen and didn't ever talk about them. He never apologized, never made amends, just like acted like everything was normal. And now he's doing some more behaviors that are resurfacing those. And I had a period of time where I was like, I, I'm sorry, excuse my language. I fucking hate that motherfucker. Like I like hated him. And I was like, if I see him, I'm gonna fucking hit him. If I see him, like I'm gonna hit him.
Mm-hmm.
And I needed to release those emotions though, and understand like the reason I felt so offended by them. And granted, like I was victimized when I was younger, no question. but I was still carrying some of that victim mentality because I was self-identifying internally with those things that he said that I was a piece of shit, that I was, which is why I always needed things to prop myself up. I needed to be the West Point cadet, the West Point graduate, the Army officer, went to the best public institution in the United States. Well, like I needed to have all those things because internally I felt I was self-identifying with the things that he told me I was.
Yeah.
Right. And once I sort of healed those attachments, right, and really understood who and what I was, that I was inherently worthy, that I was a good person, that I was loving, that I was love expressing itself. That's when I really began to understand that, oh my God, he's doesn't actually believe that I'm those things. He believes that he's those things, which is why he's doing that. It's like me when I would get in fights at bars, like I would like put it under the guise of, oh, I'm doing this because I'm sticking up for my friends, when in reality, I was projecting onto other people the anger that I was carrying inside myself. And it's just, he's doing the exact same thing. He's doing the exact same thing that I was doing because he's never healed himself. And I came to that realization. There's also a lot of wrestling with like when I had my son in 2017, I remember like a moment looking at him, and I don't know if I texted my dad or just said it or thought it in my head, but I thought like, seeing this thing that I've created, I don't know how the fuck I could ever do some of the things that my dad did to me. Like there's just no way. And I don't know. I think it's just a combination of all those things, that I went to West Point, that, you know, I was never in golden handcuffs to my dad, like never owed him anything because he didn't pay for my school. I didn't owe him anything. Like he didn't give me anything. I think it was a combination of things that I broke the pattern. I think some of us are just called to, but it's also by our own conscious decisions. Because I could have gone down the dark path. I could be cheating on my wife. I could be abusing my kids. I could be doing those same things, but I made conscious choices to do the fucking hard work to heal myself. And also to do the hard work to not give a shit what other people think about me, as long as I'm living and operating from a position of love and compassion and understanding for where other people are coming from. I think like those two things that really happened in, again, 2018 leading into 2019, that transformed me on a whole nother level. Because I don't care what people think, and I approach my life in a completely different way than I was before.
Yeah. So this is all a relatively, in the big scheme of things, a relatively recent transformation that you've gone through. This is only in the
For
past
sure.
few years. Yeah. Interesting. I want to ask a little bit about the role that gaslighting and narcissism played in this, because I think that's going to be the connective tissue to some of what the masses are dealing with now.
Okay, so I can bring up a couple instances. When I was younger, I don't remember much of the gaslighting. And I mean, obviously there's abuse, right? And it was coming from, I don't like labels to things, but like a narcissistic abusive environment, right? Narcissistically abusive environment. I mean, even the course that I took that was so transformational for me was all about healing narcissistic abuse and codependency. And that was in early 2019. It was from Tammy Joyce, who is phenomenal human being. But anyway, one instance for sure that I remember is my dad. This is a moment where he was beating the shit out of me when I was younger, and my sister said, if you guys don't stop, I'm going to call the police. My mom, again, because she was so codependent and so concerned with fixing my dad, and she would completely what's it called? Disassociate. She would disassociate and just like sit in the corner. So like my mom's sitting in the corner, bawling her eyes out, not doing anything. My dad's beating the shit out of me. My siblings are both crying. My sister's like, I'm going to call the cops if you don't stop. We didn't stop because I was trying to like wrestle him off me and fight back a little bit, but I was 14 at the time. And my sister called the cops, and the cops came over, and the cops come inside, and they initially had my dad in handcuffs, and they start taking pictures of the like bruising on me. And then my dad's going, you see, look at me too, though. Look at me. Like he was fighting me back, blah, 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 blah. And then my mom, because she's so codependent, comes down, talks to the cops. I don't know what was said, but I do know that like, I'm pretty sure my mom talked the cops out of it. right? Like, oh, it was both of them. Like it wasn't, you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
And then next day at school, cops have come take pictures of like the bruises all over my body, and CPS called my mom. They didn't take me away or anything. But the point is that was an example of like, I was being abused by my father. And yes, I was fighting back, of
Yeah.
course.
Of course.
But he flipped it when the cops came that I was the one, or like somehow it was both of us. It wasn't that big of a deal.
You were wrong too.
Yeah,
That
I
was
was wrong too.
You were wrong
Exactly.
too.
And
And
so
that's what I go
there's
ahead.
more. So later on in like the experience that's happened these last 4 years ish, my mom, as she began dealing with a lot of the trauma that she had experienced before and healing the emotions behind that, and there's a lot of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
She had a few more episodes of feeling pretty messed up, and actually she had one more suicide attempt. She had one more suicide attempt. But my dad, I think just because he had so much shame that he was dealing with still, and he had a lot of money that he had accumulated at this point in time for the first time in my entire life, at least. He started using the money in ways not that were sketchy, but that were like he would go to Vegas and spend thousands of dollars and like do things like that, and like started bringing back some of the old behaviors that he had previous to rehab. And there was a lot of weird things happening. Then, it turns out that he was having an affair with another woman behind my mom's back again. But the whole time he was telling us that we were crazy because we noticed signs that were a direct reflection of the past, right? And we would bring them up. I mean, even one example, I texted him and I was like, I don't know what you're doing, but I can tell something is wrong. Like I can just tell. The energy is the same as it was before. I can just tell. And he was like, how dare you, blah, 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 blah. Like, I can't believe you to insinuate that. And then when we find out what's going on, it was like very clear that he was manipulating us and gaslighting us to believe that my mom was crazy and fucked up. And don't get me wrong. My mom was in a dark place again for a little bit, healing some of that trauma. And it's not like that she was crazy. She had trauma that she had to heal without question. And I think he just had too much shame over what he had caused that was coming to the surface again, that he started coping in a toxic way. And then he felt more shame. And so he had to put it back on us and like get us to believe that like there's a period of time that we stopped talking to my mom because we believed she was crazy. And there's even a small period that we're like, oh my God, maybe she does have to be institutionalized again. But it was because she was being gaslighted and manipulated because he was lying to her as well. And then it wasn't until we realized that we were like, oh my God, I didn't even know what the term gaslighting was. But then I looked it up and I'm like, 100% what was happening to me.
Right. That is what is so interesting because gaslighting and narcissistic behavior is such a tricky abuse. It's not something, it's not physical abuse. It's such a mind fuck abuse.
Yes.
And if you are not familiar with it, number one, or if you're, not super emotionally fit yourself, it's very easy to become a victim of somebody else's, efforts for gaslighting and narcissistic behavior.
Well, it even continued though after, after we discovered what was going on, he kind of said like, hey, I promise I'll change. I promise this won't be the way it is. And this for me, I was old enough to remember what happened when I was younger. My siblings were a little bit younger at the time back then. I'm the oldest. And for me, I didn't take that at face value. I was like, okay, we'll see if you change. Like, we'll see. And I set a hard boundary and nothing really changed. And I went 3 years now without talking to my dad. And I've just reconnected with him recently. And we talk a little bit and like we communicate, and I love him. He's my dad. And it's also because I've healed so much of that. And I know it's not about me. It's like not about me whatsoever. He's the only dad I have. I don't want to get, 20, 25 years from now and get to a point where like, damn, I haven't spoken to my dad in 30 years. And like, if it's not harming me anymore and I know the game, then whatever, then I know how to approach the game.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I just wanted to add that little 2 cents in.
No, but that's really important because that's the thing, because so many people have a relationship with somebody, whether it's a spouse or a parent
Mm.
or, or somebody that you care about, a good friend, and they are those people.
Yeah.
But as long as you don't have to cut them out of your life, I mean, you can if you want to, but there's a lot of people you don't want to cut out of your
You
life.
got to set
So you have
boundaries
to,
though.
yeah, you've got to set boundaries and you got
Got
to
to
know
set
how to,
boundaries.
like you say, play the game
Yep.
and remove yourself emotionally from it.
Yep.
And then accept them the way they are as long as it's not doing any harm to you.
There's a difference too between accepting and enabling.
Yeah. Yes.
Like I accept the government for the way that it is. I accept the pharmaceutical industry for the way that it is. I'm not trying to petition or plead to them to change. I'm not trying to petition or plead to my dad to change. I did that forever
Right.
and it didn't work. It actually made it worse, right?
Yeah.
Because I was getting caught up in my energy hoping that they would change. It's
Hmm.
the same way that I approach this. I'm not petitioning the government to change. I don't think the government's going to change because I don't think the government realizes that what it's doing is wrong. I think it believes that what it's doing is best. Pharmaceutical industry, same way. I don't know, maybe some people at the top, but the point is,
Hmm.
um, I don't think they're going to change. I
Hmm.
know the game. I accept them for the way that they are, but I'm not going to enable them to continue doing what they do. And for me, that includes I'm not going to seek out an exemption for anything that's going on. I'm going to stand firm authentically as I am and
Right.
say, no, I'm not playing in your system. That's not how this works. I can approach you in certain ways in a relationship with you, so to
Hmm.
speak, but I'm not, it's going to be on my terms. I'm setting a boundary
Hmm.
as a sovereign, as a free human being.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think you're right. I mean, you have to look at it as you're not going to, I mean, when you're talking about an entity like the government or an entity like the pharmaceutical industry, an entity like the medical field, the medical industry,
I
there are
call them
all
the
of these
medical establishment. That's
establishment. Yeah. So all of these establishments and entities are still a collective of people.
mm.
Some of them well-meaning, good-hearted, think
Oh
they're
yeah.
doing the best, but some are just full of greed and nefarious behavior. So you're right. You're not going to change those entities or those establishments because we can't change other people. We can only change ourselves and the way that we're going to show up in life and the way that we're going to respond to what's being put forth in front of us.
I just had a realization on this actually for the first time ever. So my dad, because he had accumulated a lot of wealth, a few of my best friends growing up worked for him. And once I like cut my dad off and set a boundary, he would use my friends reel them in more with money, right? And like to turn them against me in a way. And I knew what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
But it was me trying to like convince my friends and like tell them like you're so fucked up for going like along with my dad that actually made it worse. It made them want to go towards my dad's more rather
Mm-hmm.
than letting them come to that understanding on their own terms. And
Yep.
maybe they won't ever come to that understanding, but like rather than having acceptance for like their inability to see, because that's what's so, it's the same thing that's happening now. It's so nefarious about narcissistic abuse and manipulation and gaslighting is that on the surface, it can appear so normal and so good. Like on the surface, like growing up, all my basketball teammates that like didn't know me on a deep level and come over to my house. Most of my basketball teammates were from the inner city. They were like, "Oh, you're a rich white boy that gets whatever you want. You live in the suburbs." But then the ones that would come over to my house and see, they're like, "Bro, like
Yeah.
you may live in a nice area, but fuck, like you don't get shit from your dad gives you shit like in another way, like
Right.
you know what I
Right.
mean?"
Yeah.
And it was the same thing with this, right? Like same thing with this new situation that happened in 2017. It was like on the surface, it's like it looked it's so easy to craft a narrative, especially when people are tied to you financially. It's literally the same thing, same exact thing as what's happening right now. Same thing.
Yeah. 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 Okay, we are out of time, you guys. So make sure that you come back next week and check out part 2 of my chat with Alec Zeck. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done so that you don't miss any of the good shift being shared here. And we would love it if you would give us a 5-star rating and review. That inspires other people to come and check out what we are talking about here. Until next week, Stay feisty, my friends. Stay healthy and go make some epic shift happen in your lives. And that goes for you too, Gary Vee.